can see it, according to DEA, after we fought this war for 10 years, that purity level had more than doubled and the price had already dipped to $3.90. And after 30 years of putting our heart and soul into this fight, the price had plummeted to an equivalent of 80 cents in 1980 dollars. The reason it was so relatively cheap to get high on heroin by 1999 was that street-level heroin was coming in at 38% pure. Folks, that's a problem 25 times greater than it was at the beginning of the war. How about drug users in this country? Have we cut down on those thanks to the war? I don't think so. 1965, before we ever started this war, according to DEA, we had 4 million people in this country above the age of 12 who had ever used an illegal drug. That was 2% of that population. By 2003, DEA was telling us we have 112 million people in this country above the age of 12 who've used an illegal drug. That's 46% of that population. So we went from 2% use to 46% use under a war on drugs. Sounds like we're going the wrong direction here. How about the money we spend fighting this war, or as we term it, waste fighting this war? That first year, in order to hire these officers, Mr. Nixon dumped $100 million into it, just on the federal level. That was a lot of money back then. But you know, over the years, when you combine the federal funding, the state funding, the local funding to prosecute this war, it's creeped up just a little bit in value. By 2003, it was up to $70. And that's what it costs us every year that we're going to continue, a minimum of $70 billion. What do we get for that $70 billion? We have less drugs in the country now? I don't think so. When I was a young trooper kicking in doors and seizing drugs with a warrant or without, a good seizure for a local or state cop might be 1 ounce of cocaine or 1/4 of an ounce of heroin. That was weight back then. You get very many of those, you got promoted. What do we get today? By 2002, we were seeing seizures of multiple tons of drugs. 10 tons of heroin, 1 seizure. 20 tons of cocaine, 1 seizure. And nothing changed on the street except the drugs kept getting cheaper, more potent, and far easier for our children to access. And when I say cheaper, I really mean cheaper. According to DEA, wholesale price for cocaine has dropped 60% since the beginning of the war. Wholesale price for heroin has dropped 70% since the beginning of the war. Now, if we were doing anything productive with this war, those prices would be going up, not down. How about the people that die out there? Seems to me if there's any way we should judge a policy, it is, are we saving lives? Well, it's not so with what we're doing with drugs. By 1979, there were 28 overdose deaths per 100,000 heroin users. But thanks to this war, by the year 2000, we had 141 deaths per 100,000 users, about 5 times as many. Something's wrong. We're going the wrong direction, folks. Let's talk about the number of arrests we get out there. This is a chart of only nonviolent drug offense arrests in the whole United States from 1970 to the year 2005. Before 1970, you could count the total number of nonviolent drug offenses per year, arrests in this country, in the tens of thousands, the high tens, but still the tens of thousands. And then once they increase the number of police out there doing that by up to 11 times its size, in 1970 it shot up to 415,000 people we were arresting every year. And And that inched up a little bit over the next 10 years until 1980, when we were up to 580,000, a little over 500,000 people. Then two things happened. Two things that made this policy a self-perpetuating, constantly expanding policy disaster. The first thing was the politicians got into it. They said, you cops are doing a great job out there, but you know, if you just arrest a few more people, we promise we'll back you 100%. We will create the harshest laws that have ever existed. Mandatory minimum sentences, 3 strikes, you're outlawed. You only have to deal with these people a couple times, they'll go to prison forever. Case closed, problem solved. We said, well, we'll try that. That sounds good. Let's do that. And the other change was we got a new president in 1980. Who was that?
Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Mr. Reagan really liked what we were doing out there. He said, the cops are doing a great job, guys, but you know, you're going about this from the wrong angle. You got to look at this like it's an economics equation. You're on the supply side arresting dealers when you should be on the demand side arresting users. Because if you arrest enough users, you'll frighten the users away. Of course, if there's no users out there, there won't be any users. And we said, well, that sounds sort of has a ring of logic to it. Let's try that. That was our downfall. You can see how rapidly arrests increased. By 20 years later, we quadrupled the number of people we were arresting. By 2005, we kicked it up to 1.9 million, and it's hovered right there just above every year since. 1.9 million people, it's kind of hard for me to get into my brain how much that is. If we were to throw a net over Boston that would cover 1.9 million people, how far out do you think that net would have to extend?
10 miles.
No, I've checked on it. It would have to go out beyond the I-95 beltway. And then we'd have to crawl under that net and arrest every man, every woman, every child, every baby under that net to come up with 1.9 million people. That is a lot of people, folks, and we're doing this every year like clockwork. We have a saying at Lee, you can get over an addiction, you will never get over a conviction. You can move to another state, you can even move to another country, it doesn't matter because that's on a computer, and every time you go to get a job, it's over your head like this big ugly cloud. That prospective employer looks at that record and says, druggie, we don't want you. No, we don't want you. The only place you're wanted is right back in the drug culture, the very group we say we're trying to save. Look what we're arresting them for. When I put this up, it was 43% of all the arrests were for marijuana. I think it's gone up now, 44, 45%. And when I put this up, all the way over on the right, because we were told, don't just arrest dealers, arrest users. 88% back in 2005 of the marijuana arrests were for possession. Now it's up to 89%. That's a lot of lives to destroy, folks. And you're not only destroying that individual's life when you arrest them, you're dragging down their whole family, because it's an economic thing. Imagine what happens. Thank goodness we changed this in Massachusetts. In a lot of other states, imagine what happens when a person gets, say, a 20-year-old man, woman gets caught with a marijuana cigarette. Maybe they're the breadwinner for their family, might have children. In most states, the first thing that happens is you lose your driver's license. And if you live in rural America or suburban America, what's that mean? It means you can no longer be gainfully employed, right? Because if you don't have transportation, you don't have a job in this country. And if you live in the center cities, where we do have public transportation, but you happen to be poor, so you live in government subsidized housing, you don't anymore, because the U.S. Supreme Court ruled, I think it was in 2004, that if if you're caught with so much of the marijuana cigarette, you could be thrown out of that public housing. And not only you, your entire family. If you live with your grandparents, those old folks have to hit the brakes too, because it's been ruled that we are fighting a war on drugs. When you fight a war, you can justify almost anything, at least by the Supreme Court. So my point is, we wasted a lot of money. In the last 4 decades, over $1 trillion spent on the war on drugs. And here's what we have to show for that. Total thing we have to show for that. This is cumulative arrests from 1970 to now, 39 million and counting non-violent drug offenses.